I invite you to stand and, as you're able to do so, and join with me in singing hymn number 269, Lo, the Day of Days is Here. Standing and join me in our opening words, which are different than what we usually do. So you be careful to read along, those of you who have memorized our covenant. We light this flame in celebration of Passover, which reminds us of the courage and strength of those seeking freedom, and in celebration of Easter, which reminds us of the victory of hope over despair. Turn and greet your neighbors. Say, Happy Easter.
Please be seated. I just want to say welcome to everyone. I am Chrissy Bushhager. I'm the Director of Religious Education. I am serving here with Reverend Roger Fritz, our Interim Minister, Bob Rowland, our Music Director, members of our choir, and Joy Thiessen, our accompanist. Thank you for being here this morning, and happy Easter. For our friends on Zoom, please remember that you can enable closed captioning at any time if you need it. And also please stay after the service for a Zoom coffee hour. You can be put in a breakout room to talk to other friends on Zoom. For those of you here in person, we do have coffee hour in person after the service in Fellowship Hall, which is, if you just go straight out these doors through 2 more sets of doors, you will find yourself in Fellowship Hall. We also have an egg hunt after the service today, and I want to take a minute to give some egg hunting instructions. So put on your listening ears if the egg hunt is something you're interested in. The egg hunt starts at 10:45, so that means there'll be a little bit of time between the end of the service and the start of the egg hunt. There'll be time for you to go get a snack, use the restroom, whatever you need to do, and then at 10:45 you need to be outside. If you are a toddler through a kindergartner, you're going to do your egg hunt on the playground. So you're going to gather at the door of the playground. Your parents will help you find it. And at 10:45, you'll start the egg hunt. If you are in 1st grade through 5th grade, you'll do the egg hunt in the field that's kind of like over there, where the picnic table and the gaga court and the big tree are. You're going to line up and the sidewalk around the circle, and at 10:45 you'll hear a chime, just like the chime I rang a second ago, and that'll be the signal to start the egg hunt. Now, I'm going to tell you something important. The eggs they're empty. They're not empty, they're full of love, but there's no prizes in them. So, you're going to hunt for as many eggs as you feel like finding. Find all the eggs you can, and then bring the eggs, full of love, to this little table over here in the circle. You'll see it. And you're going to trade your eggs in for a little prize bag, okay? That's how that's going to work. If you are a parent, please supervise your children during the egg hunt, a parent or guardian. If you are an adult who doesn't have anyone participating in the egg hunt this year, you are welcome to come out and watch anyway. Or if you don't feel like coming outside, you'll be able to see from the windows in Fellowship Hall. If you are leaving the service, if you are leaving our grounds around 10:45, please be extra careful driving through the parking lot today, because we'll have a lot of excited children running around. There is also overflow seating today in Fellowship Hall, and that's also a place if you need to move around a little bit. Fellowship Hall is open for overflow seating, and it has the service on Zoom, so you'll be able to watch the service as well. That's a lot of announcements this morning. All right, let's settle ourselves into worship and join in our centering song. Each Sunday we gather in community, carrying whatever joys and sorrows we bring to this space. Now is the time in our service where we can share those joys and sorrows with our community. We do this by symbolically dropping a stone into a bowl of water. As the stone hits the water and sends out ripples, so our joys and sorrows ripple through our community so that they can be shared and held together. If you are on Zoom, you are invited to put your joy or sorrow in the chat. If you're in the sanctuary, you're invited to walk up this side aisle, drop a stone, and then walk back to your seat through the center aisle. All are welcome to participate. I will drop one final stone for the joys and concerns expressed by those on Zoom and for those who weren't with us this morning.
Spirit of life, we come together this April morning to rejoice in the ongoing creation around us and within us. I pray that my senses may come alive, ready to respond to all the beauty, the harmony, the fragrance, the taste and texture of life around me. It is the season of renewal, and all around us everything is bursting into bloom or into song. The hidden beauty of nature is preparing to unfold. It is present in the mood of this joyful day, in the warm spring air and the color of blue sky. I sense its embrace. I feel us being held and cradled by it. I give thanks for this renewal. Amen. Let's sing Spirit of Life. The sharing of the plate recipient for April is Thresholds in Delaware County. Thresholds works to prevent violence and enhance problem-solving skills and provides education to develop a more positive self-image for incarcerated citizens. Share the Plate includes the plate collection on the second Sunday and any funds that we send via text. Also, there are boxes at the back of the sanctuary where folks can leave checks and cash. Thank you.
This week, Jewish people all over the world are celebrating Passover, and telling the story that I am about to tell you. They're also singing the song that we just sang, Dayenu, which means it would be enough. You can read the story that I'm about to tell you in the Hebrew Bible, but most Jewish families read it from a book called a Haggadah, which is like a guidebook that is used during the Passover Seder. The Seder is a special dinner that celebrates Passover. It tells the story that I am about to tell you through songs like Dayenu and prayers and eating some special foods in a very special way. So here's the story that is told during Passover. Long ago, the Jewish people were slaves in Egypt. The Pharaoh, or the leader of Egypt, made the Jewish people work really hard by doing things like making bricks and building pyramids. Even though the Jewish people said that they wanted to leave, they didn't want to work hard anymore, the Pharaoh would not let them leave. His heart was hard. So the story goes that the Jewish people called out to God and begged to be set free from the slavery. And God heard their calls and sent a man named Moses to help them. Now Moses went to the Pharaoh, and Moses said, God told me to tell you to let the Jewish people go, to set them free. But I told you the Pharaoh's heart was hard. He wasn't going to listen, and he said no. So Moses said, well, God is going to send 10 messages in the form of plagues to help you understand that you need to let the Jewish people free. A plague is something that's really bad, something that is harmful, something that might destroy a crop or hurt an animal or a person. A plague could even cause death. It's a really bad thing. And these plagues were sent to tell the Pharaoh that he needed to listen, he needed to let the Jewish people go free. And so the plagues started, and they did things like turn the Nile River really gross and icky and muddy. Now the Nile River was sacred to the Egyptian people, and so that was really a big deal. But it didn't change the Pharaoh's mind. It didn't soften his hard heart. He continued to enslave the people. So there were more plagues. There were plagues that destroyed crops, so there was no food to eat. There were plagues that caused pain, plagues that hurt animals. And through all of this, the Pharaoh would not change his mind. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he said, okay, make it stop, and we'll let the people go. And so the plague stopped, but then the Pharaoh changed his mind back. Ooh, I know. So through all of these plagues, Moses kept going to the Pharaoh and saying, listen, you need to let the people go. You need to give them their freedom. It's the right thing to do. But the Pharaoh's heart was hard. There was even a plague of frogs, where frogs just fell from the sky. There were frogs everywhere. And maybe if you're someone who really likes frogs, who thinks frogs are cool, that would have been fun. But it actually, if you think about it, wouldn't have been super fun, because like if there were frogs everywhere, frogs in your soup, you wouldn't want that. So even with the plague of frogs, Pharaoh would not let the people go. Finally, there was a last plague. It was a plague that caused death to some people, even members of the Pharaoh's own family. But that plague passed over the homes of the Jewish people. After that plague, finally the Pharaoh said, you know what, get out of here. He let the Jewish people go, but they knew that his heart hadn't really changed. He was just fed up. So they knew they had to get out of there very, very, very quickly. So they went running as fast as they could. They didn't even have time to let the bread rise, to let the dough rise to make bread, which is why our Jewish friends eat matzah during Passover, because it's a flat, unleavened cracker. So the Jewish people ran to the edge of a sea, the Sea of Reeds. And now they're stuck, because they're at this sea and they're trying to figure out how to cross it. Do we go around the sea? And they hear Pharaoh's army right behind them. He had changed his mind again, that big meanie. So what was going to happen? Well, the story goes that God sent a wind a wind that separated the sea, that caused two walls of water to come up and dry land in between. And the Jewish people were able to run through the dry land all the way to the far side of the sea. They were able to escape. And Pharaoh's army, when it came through the water, as soon as the last member of the Jewish people got to the far end of the water, the waves came back down, and Pharaoh's army was trapped in the sea. The Jewish people burst into song, they were free. And that is the Passover story. Thank you for listening to my story today.
We have a responsive reading on the screen, and I invite you to read the congregational part. We celebrate the memory of winter's sleep and the quieting of our souls. We celebrate the return of color and the rebirth of wonder. We celebrate the treasure of new life and the promise within. We celebrate the human cycle of joy and sorrow and the companionship of this community. We celebrate the search for what is sacred and the lifelong pursuit of truth. We celebrate the promise of summer's bounty and how it will feed our souls. And I invite the choir to come forward and sing "Now the Green Blade Rises." In the spring, people in the northern hemisphere gather in one way or another to express their affection for these warmer days and the green trees and the beautiful grass as it's coming out. But for Christians, Easter is not just a cultural festival celebrating spring. Easter is a time to celebrate the life of Jesus, described in the New Testament Gospels. Now, this is a typical Bible, like the kind that many people have in their homes. And I was given to me by my Aunt Letha, who was a Southern Baptist, on the occasion of my ordination, and she had my name imprinted here. And it's got wonderful gold paint on the sides that make it really shiny and pretty. And it's indexed. It has I don't think this is leather. It's a kind of a fake leather cover. It's really, and the pages are really thin so they can get the whole Bible in a fairly compact way. Very special. And in here are the Gospels in the New Testament that tell the story of the life of Jesus. And I was given this as a reminder that my Aunt Letha was a strong Southern Baptist and believed what was in here was really the truth. And I loved her very much for giving this to me. But I already knew, because I had gone to school, that what was in here wasn't exactly the truth. It's more of an imaginary story. I found out when I went to school that the original Gospels were not written at the time that Jesus was walking the earth. They were written about 70 to 125 years later. Let's imagine 70 years ago, something happened. Let's see, would that be 1950, around the time I was born? And people told stories about it, but then somebody finally said, well, let's write down what happened in 1953. And that was the only record kept. And then somebody else said, well, they didn't get that quite right. So it's 90 years now. Let's write down what happened and what we remember in the stories we heard. And then 125 years, the Gospel of John was written, 125 years after the birth of Jesus. And so they wrote this down. Now, Jesus spoke Aramaic, but they wrote it down in Greek. So already there's a translation from languages and there's a translation from history. But then they wrote this on papyrus, which doesn't hold up very well, and it starts to deteriorate and fall apart. So all those early copies of the history of Jesus' life on earth, they all fell to dust. We have one fragment, and we can see the slide there. The oldest gospel fragment, still in existence, is created 125 years after Jesus was born. And actually, it's in the John Ryan's library in Manchester, England. And I was lucky enough that Unitarian College in Manchester invited me to come over for a few days to talk with them. And I was lucky enough to go to the library and actually see this fragment under glass, the oldest copy of anything about Jesus that we have in the whole world. Well, so people would notice that the books are falling apart, and scribes would come along and handwrite new versions. And we don't know whether they added things or took things out. We think they did. So you're copying along, you say, well, this is an interesting story, but I know a better story, so maybe I'll just add that. Or here's, I heard a saying the other day, a wisdom saying that really is important in my life, so I'll just add that as I'm writing along and recopying the Gospels. We just don't know what happened. But these Gospels were copied over and over again for hundreds of years. And then, eventually, one of them survived, two of them survived, 350 years after Jesus was born. And we can go to the next slide. They're copying the Gospels. This is a recently discovered photograph of a monk working away. So about 100, almost 200 years ago, scholars began to say, let's go out and investigate. Let's go to the Middle East and go to the monasteries and see if we can find some old manuscripts that are still around, that we can actually see if we can get the earliest Gospels. Maybe we can find one that was written really close to after Jesus died on the cross. So one man, a German from Leipzig, who was a biblical scholar and an archaeologist, went in 1844 to St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, Egypt, at the foot of Mount Sinai. And this man he's a young man who was just fascinated with this whole subject. I don't know if he wore a hat quite like this, but he rode on camels to get there. It was not easy to get there. And then he arrived and he looked around, and they had a library with all these old manuscripts. And he was sitting in the library one day looking at stuff, and he noticed that there was a basket in the library. And I wasn't able to get any ancient papyrus today, but just imagine that this is ancient papyrus. And he said to the librarian, "What are you going to do with all that stuff in the basket?" And he says, "Oh, we're taking the old stuff out of the library, and we use it to start the fire in to heat the monastery." And the German scholar said, "Do you mind if I just kind of look at this?" He says, "Oh, we're going to burn it anyway." "Sure, you can have it." So he took it to his room and he looked at it, and he discovered that these were very ancient manuscripts with the New Testament written in them. And he took them back to Leipzig, where they still are today in the library there in Germany. Well, he got very excited about this. He wanted to see other things. He was just, I said to the librarian, "This is really wonderful stuff. You shouldn't burn this. This is so great." And the librarian thought, he's getting really excited. Maybe the stuff we have is valuable. And he wouldn't let him see anything else. Don't get too excited if you're working with a librarian who doesn't know what he really has. Well, he went back 9 years later. He went down for Germany, back to the St. Catherine's Monastery, and he stayed there for several days exploring the library, and he was disappointed. He didn't really find anything, and they wouldn't really give him access to stuff. But this was a persistent biblical archaeologist, and he went back again in 1859. And by then, I think there was a kind of a shift in the library management. He again looked around in the library. He couldn't find anything really significant, very old manuscripts. It's got to be the last day. It was in February. And he was walking in the garden out there with one of the monks, talking about Greek manuscripts of the Bible. And the monk said, "You want to come back to my room for a minute and have a cup of tea?" And they went back into the room, and then the monk went into a corner, and he had a manuscript all wrapped up, something like cloth. And there's a lot of interference that day on the microphone. And then he unwrapped it, and he looked at it and discovered it didn't look exactly like this, but a book, an ancient book that had the oldest copy of the Bible in existence. And let me use this microphone from the pulpit. That'll work better. So, he got very excited. They let him take the manuscript back to his room. He couldn't sleep all night. This Greek Bible that he had, he got to look through 1859, all of this wonderful information about Jesus and the entire Old Testament and New Testament, and he estimated it was created about 350 years after Jesus' death, which makes it the oldest complete manuscript of the Bible. And according to the German archaeologists, Bible archaeologists, they gave him permission to take it back to Europe. Today they would say it was stolen, but he did get a receipt. And he took it, his research was sponsored by Tsar Nicholas Alexander II in Russia, who lived in St. Petersburg. So he took it to St. Petersburg, and it was kept in the Library of St. Petersburg, the National Library of Russia. And the Tsar sent about 7,000 rubles to the monastery as payment for this manuscript, the oldest biblical manuscript in existence. The earliest information we have about the life of Jesus that's complete. Well, of course, there was a revolution in 1917 in Russia, and the communists took control, and Stalin didn't really care that much about New Testament scholarship or the Bible, but he did have funding problems for his new country. So he sold the biblical manuscript to the British Library for £100,000, which would be roughly $8 or $9 million today. And there was actually a campaign in London and in England to raise the money to buy the manuscript, and it was taken to the British Library. I was very excited when I went to England for the first time in 1981 to go to the British Library and see the world's oldest Bible. I thought there would be a crowd around it, but actually nobody was paying any attention but me. But still, this manuscript, this amazing manuscript, was right there in the British Library, and you can go see it today if you want to. Biblical archaeology. It's so exciting to imagine that we can somehow touch what people in the past have done. But what do we really know about Jesus after we gather all this information together? Not very much about his real life. The experts say things like, we know that he lived. Some people doubt this, but it's pretty confident that he actually lived. We know that he was probably baptized by John the Baptist, because that appears in several sources. We know that over a period of 1 to 3 years, the timing is not quite clear, he walked around the countryside talking about restoring the Jewish religion, debating the Jewish authorities who were in power. We know that he was crucified by the Roman leader, Pontius Pilate. And the experts agree that the story of him coming back to life after he was executed was invented by his followers after death and didn't really happen. That's about all we're certain of. But when I've gone as far as I can learning about the historic facts about the life of Jesus, there's another step to take. As I would with any other story, I look at the writings of the New Testament in terms of my own experience of life, especially on a Christian holy day such as Easter. I ask myself, do the parables in the Bible, do they enrich my life? Do the wisdom sayings offer useful advice on my own day-to-day living? Can the example of Jesus' life serve as a model for me? And when I'm finished gathering the facts, the minimal facts that we can gather, in the end, the value of the Gospels depends on whether the words give meaning to my life. And for me, the answer is yes. When I read, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country, I learn about the difficulties of social action. When I read, to him who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also, I learn about the nature of nonviolence. When I read, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you, I learn about the nature of love. When I read, where your treasure is, there will be your heart also, I learn about the danger of greed. When I read, how can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye, I learn about the nature of counseling. When I read, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves, I learn about the nature of the potential evil within us, including certain politicians who are false prophets. So early in the spring, at Easter, people in the Northern Hemisphere gathered to celebrate the amazing green trees, the colorful flowers that appear, the fresh green sprouts, the sounds of the birds, the squirrels playing in the trees, the daily increase in warm sunlight. And many gather on this Sunday to express their affection for the teachings of Jesus. Each year I give thanks for the beauty of spring, and I join with Christians in celebrating the fact that Jesus' stories, Jesus' sayings, have survived over 2,000 years and given guidance to millions of people around the world. Let's sing, O Day of Light and Gladness. I invite you to join with me in reciting our closing words. May the brightness of the green grass fill you with joy. May the sweet perfume of the spring flowers scent the place where you stand. May the songs of the birds bring music to your soul. And may the warm sun shine on you, renewing your life. Blessed be. Amen.